So it caused confusion and terror rather than saving lives.
But confusion and terror are part of war, right?
Well, no, there shouldn't be confusion and terror applied to a civilian population.
But
I mean, if you're going to give warnings, they should be specific.
But when the terrorists, the militants, whatever one wants to call them, are known to be embedded in, as you say, those tight, complex, concentrated areas, what's the other army to do?
It's, for example, to launch commando actions, to get at the militants and not the innocent civilian. And there's an element of punishment if one looks at the attacks on the infrastructure, on the food infrastructure. One sees a pattern of attacking all of the people of Gaza, not simply the militants.
Why do you think they bombed the infrastructure so thoroughly?
Well, we've found that the only logical reason is collective punishment against the people of Gaza for voting into power Hamas, and a form of reprisal for the rocket attacks and mortar attacks on southern Israel.
So that would be the explanation for why, if they were interested only in stopping the bombing, they didn't have to destroy the land.
No, this was a political decision, I think, and not a military one. And I think they were telling the people of Gaza that if you support Hamas, this is what we're going to do to you.
Well, talk a little more about that. Give me some more examples of what you see as a pattern in the destruction of the infrastructure.
Well, I'd start with the bulldozing of agricultural fields. Apparently, pretty random. It wasn't as though these farms were owned by Hamas militants. I haven't seen that allegation made. The bombing of some 200 industrial factories. As I mentioned, the only flour-producing factory, the water supply facilities of Gaza, the sanitation facilities, which caused an overflow of filth and muck into well over a square kilometre of land.
Do you know if these were targeted, or were they the consequence of actions aimed at militants?
No, well, clearly, there can be no question of militants running 200 factories. There can be no. We know from our investigations that the owner of the flour factory, in fact, had one of the rare documents the Israelis give, which allowed the owner to go into Israel. He dealt with Israeli counterparts. He received, and it's an interesting case, he received a warning to evacuate. He evacuated his staff. Nothing happened. They went back, and he made inquiries through a friend in Israel who contacted the Israel Defense Force and said, don't worry, they're not going to bomb your factory. They went back. A few days later, he gets another telephone call saying evacuate. It doesn't come to him, it comes to their switchboard. He again makes inquiries, don't worry, we're not going to bomb. So they go back. Nothing happens. Third warning to evacuate, they evacuate and they bomb the factory. Now, if there was any militants involved, firstly, the Israelis know who they're dealing with. They'd given him a document allowing him to go into Israel. It's that sort of conduct which indicates to us an intent to punish civilians in Gaza for what their leaders were complicit in doing.
It's difficult for us in this country to understand this intimacy of self-destruction, that you just described. A Gazan factory owner calls a friend in Israel who calls the military, and then he calls back to the factory. I mean, they're just right across an invisible border, right?
It's a sort of evidence which has a credibility to it. It's not the sort of evidence that this man is going to concoct.
What were your standards of evidence as you conducted these discussions, investigations, and hearings in Gaza?
Well, we spoke to well over 100 witnesses. We didn't obviously take at face value everything we were told.
Yeah, one criticism was that those witnesses were supplied by Hamas militants.
Well, in fact, that's not correct. We made our own inquiries and we decided who we would see. We weren't given a list by Hamas or anybody else. We chose incidents, 36 out of, as I say, could have been hundreds. But we chose the people we want to see, and certainly there was no Hamas presence anywhere near the vicinity of where we saw people. There were malicious statements to the effect that there were, but I can give you every assurance that it didn't happen, and I can assure you that if it did happen, I wouldn't have been prepared to continue to operate under those situations. I would have insisted that they leave. And if I couldn't achieve that, I would have abandoned the investigation.
Was there a moment when you thought, why am I doing this?
Oh, there've been frequent moments.
No,
like
I mean,
that.
during the time you were conducting the investigation. I know since then you might have had second thoughts.
But even then, it was a very difficult, you know, I was quite frankly nervous going into Gaza. I had nightmares about being kidnapped. You know, it was very difficult, especially for a Jew, to go into an area controlled by Hamas. So I did. It was, you know, I went in with a certain amount of fear and trepidation.
And were there moments when you were apprehensive, when you thought perhaps...
No, on the contrary, I was struck by the warmth of the people that we met and who we dealt with in Gaza. You know, my fears were put aside. When I went back for the second visit to Gaza, I went with much more equanimity and level of acceptance.
But since they knew you were coming to try to prove that Israel had committed war crimes, I mean, you would have expected some hospitality, right?
No, but there was criticism. When my appointment was announced, there were some Hamas statements objecting to a Jew being appointed and expecting a Jew to be even-handed. I was certainly very conscious of being Jewish offering me no excuse to refuse to do it. You know, any more than it would have, I could have lived with myself being a white South African looking into terrible violations committed by white South Africans.
Were you frightened then?
Yes, I was, absolutely.
Your life was in danger then?
It was, very much so.
You had to have...
I had security.
Yeah. And what about Rwanda and the Balkans? Were you ever fearful in those other situations? I mean,
Yes,
you seem to
again,
keep walking into the heart of darkness, if I may say.
You know, I went through some pretty difficult situations, especially flying into Sarajevo during the war in helicopters, having flak jackets, flying into an airport that was under heavy attack by the Bosnian Serb forces. That was a hair-raising, probably one of the most nervous situations I've ever been in.
Why do you do these things?
Well, you know, I think one accepts these duties and obligations, not knowing where they're going to lead, and then one has to do one's duty.
But why do you have to do your duty? I mean, what made a Richard Goldstone?
Well, I think it's one's experience. I felt certainly I got involved in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa because of my anger and frustration at the unfairness of racial oppression, and I was privileged to be able to get involved and make a difference. And then I found myself really, as a result solely of pressure from Nelson Mandela getting involved in the War Crimes Tribunal in the Yugoslavia. I didn't want to do it, but he twisted my arm, and he's a very good arm twister, and I found myself in Bosnia. Then the Security Council asked me to do Rwanda. Swedish Prime Minister asked me to do Kosovo. Kofi Annan asked me to do Oil for Food. These have all been difficult inquiries. I think I must confess I've got a tremendous amount of satisfaction from doing that. It's put me into a position of working with absolutely outstanding people. So really one thing leads to the other.
But this is an occasion in which, being a Jew, some right-wing Jews in Israel have accused you of betraying your people. This has never happened before, has it? Maybe the white South Africans accused you of betraying white South Africa, right. But this is different, isn't it?
Well, it's different, but it's symptomatic of the same disease.
Which is?
Which is a form of racism. Why should my being Jewish stop me from investigating Israel? I just don't see it. I think friends should be open to criticism from friends. I think it's more important. I think true friends criticize their friends when they do wrong things.
Well, let me come back to some of that criticism, because I've tried to read as much as I can of the response to your report, as well as reading the report, which is compelling and terrifying, actually. But Israelis claim that if you hold them to this standard that you've just described, that law prescribes for conflict, any democracy that's fighting terrorism is likely to find itself dragged into an international court of justice. I mean, do you consider that a valid concern?
No, absolutely not. Take the United States fighting wars in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. They have certainly at a high level gone to extremes to protect innocent civilians.